go.
That only took 4 attempts, but we finally did it.
Instead of 3 times the charm, 4 times the charm.
What matters is we're here, so that's all that's good. So thank you so much for your patience, Adrian. It's so good to see you again.
Good to see you as well. How are you doing?
I have to admit, after overcoming that technical challenge, I'm feeling much better now. It's been since all the craziness that was happening last week in your end of the world. I think that honestly, I'm feeling pretty good. What about you?
Yeah, I feel pretty good too. In about a week or so, we'll have a new administration here, so can't complain about that. There's already an upside right there. But yeah, so far pretty good.
I think there are some exciting things ahead of us. So let's get into this. So we're here today to talk about queer representation in media. And I have got to say, like I mentioned to you when we were together chatting for the first time, that I have really, really been keen to have a conversation like this, because I have felt, obviously as a gay man, I think watching a lot of queer films, for instance, they've never really been that, put it this way, they've never really had what I call a happy ending. And I know that there's obviously been a much bigger push for diversity and for inclusion. And yet at some time, I almost feel like it's like a baby step, but it's not enough to satisfy me as a viewer. So that's where I come from. But I'd love to hear your thoughts and feelings on this before we dive straight in.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, I feel like we've made tremendous strides, to where we are now. We're starting to see a lot more, like you said, diversity and inclusion and just representation of queer folk in media. But I still think we have a lot more to go in terms of just showing true inclusion, diversity and representation in media. And so my hope is that, now that we're kind of in this new day and age where, we have folks like, Ryan Murphy or Ava DuVernay, for example, who are bringing diversity and representation to the forefront. We're going to be seeing a lot more of that in the future, and hopefully once the industry in general starts to get back up on its feet after the pandemic starts to calm down.
Yeah, I agree. And I think there's definitely a lot more opportunity for inclusivity and diversity going forward, because I think we're seeing a lot more people really step up into these roles, which is great. I mean, I think, generally speaking, I think it's wonderful because it just shows how colorful, as a human race we are. I think for me, what I'm looking forward to most is really selling more authentic stories, on screen too. But before we get into that, just for the sake of my audience, I'd be wonderful to hear a bit about who you are and what you're doing.
Yeah, sure. So, to your followers who don't know me, my name is Adrian Nuño. I am a Latinx content creator based out of Chicago, Illinois, here in the United States. And I have been a content creator for the past 10 plus years. My focus with the work that I do is, of course, telling stories through film and web series, but having a focus on showing stories that highlight underrepresented topics and communities. So one of my latest projects that I did about 3 years ago was on mental health. And now the web series I'm currently working on is a show called Bordered that highlights the Latinx community. And one of the characters in the show is a gay Latinx character. And we'll get more into that later in the live.
Yeah, and I'm really excited to talk more about that too. I think listening to everything you've done, you've definitely touched upon a lot of really cool elements in your time, from mental health, from what it's like growing up as Latin American, based on your own lived experience too, which I think is really good in terms of showing relevancy to this community. And for those of you who don't know me from your audience, Adrian, so my name is Ken. I'm a relationship coach specifically for gay men. I help single gay men overcome breakups, rejection, identify red flags, and to attract open, honest, committed partners. So my interest in the media in this section is really more as a consumer, in the sense that I've enjoyed reviewing, watching, and being part of, you know, the movie scene, TV shows. Like, that's been my childhood essentially. So, you know, it's my form of escapism. And I think that one thing that I've noticed as I've transitioned into my current role as a relationship coach is that I have struggled to maintain my interest, because sometimes I feel like relationships are not accurately represented, even if they are straight relationships, because sometimes I look at them and go, wow, that's not how I would imagine, you know, these dynamics to go down. Or sometimes I feel like we glorify the very unhealthy relationships that happen too. Like,
Yeah.
is it 500 Days of Summer? I have never
Yep.
seen that. I've never seen that movie, but except in like clips, and I just sort of look at that and think, gosh, you know, I can imagine people would come away from that thinking, well, sometimes maybe, you know, it just takes one right person to make someone who was hot and cold with us switch and somehow fall magically in love. And it's, in my world, in dating and relationships, it's not always that way. So I find that I often have to dispel the myths of movies, essentially. What are your thoughts on that, Adrian?
Yeah, no, I mean, my thoughts on how they show these relationships in movies and TV is kind of one of two things. Either it's, you know, the perfect honeymoon-like, you know, beautiful fairy tale romance, or kind of the tragic romance that, you know, sometimes it's kind of a cool idea to have this tragic romance that kind of has, you know, that kind of just has a tragic ending. And so I think it's healthy to show a relationship that does have moments of happiness, but also has moments, you know, that there are kind of ups and kind of have their ups and downs, kind of show what a true relationship is like. It's not always moments of happiness and you know, kind of like the honeymoon stage. I think it's healthy to show those moments of hardship, but to show how you can properly, you know, work it out with your significant other, and show how, you know, you two can work it out. So I think, you know, that's kind of basically my thoughts on that. That it's one of those two, either the happy, like, fairy tale romance, or the tragic romance that we often see in a lot of media.
Yeah, I agree with you. Are there any movies in particular, or even shows, where they've really brought that to mind?
Oh man. The thing is, as a movie person, like, not just one, but like several titles like overload my mind right now. And so, like, I think the most recent example that I could think of is Love, Victor, the Hulu show that premiered last year, and where we had, of course, the main protagonist, you know, trying to figure out who he was. But I mean, for those who haven't seen the show, spoilers, so maybe cover your ears if you haven't seen it yet. But at the end, he ends up, first of all, comes out as gay, but pretty much at the cost of being with a girl that he was with, he ends up with a guy. And so it kind of shows that, you know, there was a consequence of you know, being with this person that now he's meant to be with. And so there really isn't exactly, I mean, that's an example of kind of like a tragic story that, you know, we kind of have to have these consequences in place in the result of, you know, two queer men, you know, ultimately being with each other.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting example, because if that was real life, I imagine the show would never really expand on what that experience would be like, because, you know, these movies and shows will typically show a snapshot of that person's lived experience. You know, they will show a breakup, and then, of course, for the drama's sake, it's obviously very entertaining to watch someone have a breakup. But I think as a consequence, it means that many viewers might walk away thinking, oh, well, ain't that really sad? This person's never going to get another opportunity like this again, when it's so far from the truth. And I think that's where, you know, for me, with my mental health background, I think, oh, that's where we get all of our scarcity mindset from. That's where we think, oh, we'll never have, you know, someone love us again like that person did when they were together in that dynamic, so to speak. Then on top of that too, there's also, you know, I don't know this show specifically, but I know that in the case of real life relationships like that, where, say, for example, if a guy came out as gay to his girlfriend and was seeing another guy on the side, you know, that would never usually go down very, it's not a straightforward transition. Many men would have a lot of closeted feelings, a lot of shame about making that step. So I can imagine that dynamic, that transition where a guy is leaving, the safety of being closeted to coming out as gay and embracing that, he'd have to unwork shame. He'd have to unwork through even whether or not this is something he wants. He might even run back to that safe space that he was in. And I think that is where I look at it and go, it's not so clear cut as that. And I think there's layers upon layers of complexity that sometimes movies and show miss out on.
Yeah, yeah. And another good example of this idea was actually a reference that you had brought up, Call Me By Your Name, which shows a massive tragic romance that just falls apart by the end. I know that you had quite the thoughts about that movie.
I think to summarize my thoughts on that movie is it's a beautiful blossoming romance that ends in a closeted relationship because it's sad. Elio at the end is left very much alone and he's not given any sense of, I think, closure in a way that's satisfying. It's very disheartening. So that's my thoughts on that. What are your thoughts on Call Me By Your Name?
Yeah, kind of the same thing. Just like, he's kind of just left there to deal with his thoughts, and even like the end where he's literally just by himself, just crying, even as like the credits are playing, which I guess, performance-wise was great, but when it comes to the relationship was terrible because, I mean, just the thought of if I ever did that to somebody, I would feel so god-awful to leave someone like that.
Well, you'd feel misled because, I think the thing that I didn't like about it was at the end, it was kind of like star-crossed lovers. Oh, it couldn't be. And it's like, no one wants to hear that, This person, poor Elio, was led on. That's exactly the worst thing about it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So yeah, pretty much my thoughts are pretty much your thoughts on that film in its entirety.
Yeah, because I know some people that I was even dating at the time, they would say, "Oh, I will say this about Call Me By Your Name. I loved how beautiful and in some ways surreal that relationship was, because it was really beautiful, honeymoon phase, love. And I felt that and I got that. My problem as a viewer was thinking to myself, and if, like, it's just it's again, something I think a lot of men and women have gone through where they have had a honeymoon romance which has ended well before it has started. And I think it's romanticizing only one portion of that, which is the dream. And it is a very dreamlike movie, and I think it captures that part brilliantly. I just think that grief, when it happens, is such a multi-layered thing that you would never see Elio going from disbelief to being angry to having to accept what happened and actually moving on and finding someone who actually gives him sustainability. And so right. I think we only see just a snapshot of that, as beautifully portrayed as it is. And I think that it's sort of, what's that phrase? Better to have loved than to have never loved at all.
Never loved at all?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I feel like it romanticizes that.
Right, right. Yeah, well, from what I hear, there's supposedly going to be a sequel to this film. So hopefully we might get some more closure on this chapter in Elio's life and maybe see where he goes next. So we'll have to see.
If there was to be a sequel and you were directing it, what would you, or even writing it, what would ideally you like to be exploring in that film?
Oh gosh. I think it's more like what wouldn't I explore? I feel like I would try to put so many things in this. It would be a lot longer than the initial runtime of the first movie. I think I would just want Elio to try to explore him being comfortable with his true self. You know, kind of facing that sense of self-acceptance that I didn't personally feel a lot of in the first film. And then maybe at the end, then throw in, a relationship once he's fully comfortable being himself. Because also at a time where, that still wasn't exactly widely accepted, and maybe it's not even still widely accepted today. But just kind of show that, especially given the time period that this story takes place in.
Yeah, I agree. And that was something I was thinking about too, is that that was a very, given the setting of that film, it takes place in a time period which is not exactly, gay friendly, for want of a better term. So
Right.
it is a bit, I mean, it's a bit jarring because we want the best for Elio based on our own lived experiences, yet I don't think that such a time would ever really give him that love that he deserves. So it was a really interesting film, and I agree with you. It would be wonderful to flesh that out. I don't remember who his lovers, like what his name was. What was that character's name again? His lover in the movie.
I know that the actor is Armie Hammer. I
That'll
believe his name might have been Oliver, I think.
That sounds about right.
Yeah, because I saw the film years ago, back when it was, of course, in the heat of Oscar season. And
Yeah.
the film actually did get an Academy. Yes, there we go. Thank you,
Oliver,
Olivia.
thank you.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah. But yeah, played by Armie Hammer. And yeah. Still a beautiful film. And I'd suggest anyone who hasn't seen it still give it a watch. And yeah, definitely, like, if you do end up watching it, whoever's watching, let me know what you think. Because I definitely want to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I agree. I think, though, if there were to be a sequel, I can kind of imagine predictably, Oliver would return in some formal capacity. I just feel it would be a mistake if Elio were to get back with Oliver at the end of that, just because, from what I know based on my own lived experiences with people in this phase, like, I mean, okay, Oliver's clearly closeted. He's clearly not, in a position to date Elio. So I feel like that would kind of give people, I feel like the message that would bring is that there's hope in these sort of situations. Yes, I love hope. I believe that it's a very powerful force when applied under the right circumstances. But with a breakup like that, if the film is set, like, maybe, I don't know, like, if this is the difference to see between, like, the film being set like 6 months versus 6 years apart.
Right.
If it's 6 months apart and they were to try getting back together, my brain would be thinking tragedy is going to ensue once again. But if it was 6 years, then you could really navigate the complexities of how Elio's feeling about, his previous relationship, whether he's, being like, that was a phase and I'm moving on to more sustainable things. And where's, Oliver's headspace at this stage? Is he more comfortable being out? So I feel like you could take it one of two ways. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, God. Oh, I feel like we could have, like, a whole conversation just dissecting the entire movie. And I guess maybe Olivia, since she's chiming in, maybe could join this, because holy cow, there is just... these are all things I just want to see in the sequel in general. But first and foremost, the self-acceptance of Elio's character. But yeah, I feel like I would have to dive into that a lot more to dissect that, because there is just so much you can break down from all of that.
I agree. I mean, it's definitely going to be interesting when the sequel does pop out, because I feel like, we'd have to come back on again and be like, so what were our predictions and what are our thoughts now that it's done? So that's, so generally speaking, a lot of, in my experience, gay films, particularly the mainstream ones, including Breaking Bad, Brokeback Mountain, like, Breaking Bad could have been a gay tragedy, but Brokeback Mountain, typically they have their tragic endings. They're not really films where we see our gay protagonists heading off into the sunset, happily ever after.
The end, yeah.
And, yeah, so when they're not doing that, they're usually what I call very token. It's sort of like, oh, a quaint lesbian couple. There's the lesbian character in this film, or there's the gay couple in that. And I don't mean to say that as if I'm someone who's at the forefront of a Me Too movement with this, and that's not to disrespect that movement either. It's more just to say, sometimes I feel it's done in a sort of like a soft way, like, oh, we've got this gay character, like in Sleeping Beauty, who's never really explored or given a much depth. It's sort of just like, this is the safe thing to do. So what's your experience been with that, Adrian?
I mean, in general, I mean, at least lately right now, the biggest thing for me is when studios, in general, often, publicize the fact that they have, a gay character in a movie. Like I remember when Beauty and the Beast came out not too long ago, there was a lot of talk about one of the characters being gay. And then there was just so much hype built around it, so much that theaters even refused to show the film because of this one supposed scene in the film that had a character being queer. And I think one of the biggest things for me is just we have to work on normalizing gay characters and queer characters in general, so that we don't have to make it so much a big announcement that, oh, look at how diverse we're being, look how inclusive we're being. It's just, oh, there's a character in this story that just happens to be queer, and that's that. I think that's one of the biggest steps we can take towards normalizing it, because I think right now the fact that we still are in a position where we kind of put so much focus on, like, look how we're being so inclusive is one of the problems as to why this is not being normalized.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. And I think that there is such a hype and a fuss put behind it that it means that we actually aren't meeting with the real people as well when they're on screen, because there's so much, fanfare about it being like, oh, look at us, look at all the work we're doing, but it's not genuine. And even that, and that shows on screen too. Like, it's just sort of, I feel like it's publicity for publicity's sake. It's not, we are here to tell a story of, the lives of these people or the relationship dynamics or, these real individuals. And I get it, like people might argue, well, it's Disney and how real is Disney? Well, I think it's real enough that people have got some very interesting notions as to what true love is, as to what, life is. And I think we as a society shouldn't be naive as to the influence of these big movies and how they play, especially on children's lives as well. And I think that, growing up, being able to have these authentic characters on screen is so healthy for all of us concerned. So that way it doesn't feel like such a, we're not reacting out of fear. We're not reacting out of discrimination, racism. We're actually just going, this is part of everyday life. It is what it is. These people like different genders, like people like tomatoes, apples, and oranges. It's just preference and, well, to a degree. And I think that that's where I see a lot of value, obviously, in the representation of the media. I just think that sometimes it's, as you said, it's done in such a way where it's like, it's not genuine to the people being portrayed on screen.
Yeah, no, exactly. And kind of going forward on that, on top of this not also feeling like it has to be like a checklist that you just check off, like we have this, we have that. I also hope that we start to see more inclusivity of what queer characters look like, because especially in media, they're often portrayed as people who are very fit, people who, look, a very certain way, very like heavily attractive folks, and not. We're not all like that. That is not true to how it actually is. And I notice that we're starting to move a bit more in that direction, but I feel like we're not moving in that direction fast enough. And so my hope is that we're going to start moving forward more so in that direction to really emphasize that when we say inclusive, we actually mean inclusive to everybody, not just people who look this particular way and have these particular attributes, and if you have these particular attributes, we'll put you on screen. Because that's not inclusive at all, not diverse at all to what true, authentic, queer representation in media should be in this day and age.
I love everything that you just said, and to complement all of that too, I remember so I'm finishing off this book called Straight Jacket, which is all about growing up gay and also some of the addictions we face, and one of them that's talked about is body addiction and body shaming. And
right.
I said about how seeing only a cross-section of, we're not really seeing a cross-section, just wait one second. We're not seeing a full cross-section of gay lives or lesbian, bisexual, transgender, and the rest in film. We're only seeing what looks attractive, what sells. And I think that as a society, the challenge there is that it's very easy to look at a pretty face. But that's not what dominates the world. You know, we have so many people of different body shapes and sizes. The author, who was originally an editor for, I think it was an LGBT magazine called Attitude in the UK, he was talking about how whenever he tried to change the publication to actually show people of different body shapes and sizes rather than just having the fit model, sales always went down. So I think knowing that, you know, we know that obviously sex sells. It's almost on, you know, it's challenging because on one hand, the risk we run as a society is that our art doesn't sell, but we almost need to start going in that direction, I feel, in order to actually properly represent people for who they are without trying to create this lens that everyone has to appear a certain way, especially within the gay community, where I feel like body image is such a dominant factor in our lives that it really does hurt, ruin so many relationships because we're not actually seeing people for who they are. It's just a meat market.
Yeah, yeah. And this, I mean, this trickles down from media down to, you know, dating apps, down to people you meet at bars or clubs. I mean, you name it. It all starts at the top and then just works its way down to the people you meet in real life. And I know we're not doing a lot of that right now, but, you know, once things get back to a somewhat sense of normalcy, you know, of course, we're going to get back to pretty much where we already were before the pandemic started.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more with you, Adrian. And I think, you know, with all the work that you're doing, I know we've discussed this quite a bit. So off the back of everything that we've talked about, you know, how far we've come, what we'd like to see. You know, can you share a bit about, you know, what you've done with your web series Border and how that's really tried to take us to that next step of representation in media?
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, one of the big things that we're doing for our web series already is the idea of authenticity and really showing these characters for who they are, because often in media, Latinx people are portrayed as the drug dealers. They're portrayed as people who don't live in the best of circumstances, or people who live in, you know, heavily populated Latinx communities like Los Angeles. And, you know, while, you know, those things certainly are, you know, at least as far as the Los Angeles Latinx community are true, you know, that's not true in terms of the entirety of what Latinx people are, you know, because we all don't live in heavily Latinx communities. We all, you know, for the most part, are just like everyday people. We have, you know, struggles like everyone else. We have our strengths and weaknesses like everyone else. And so we really want to show that side of being Latinx and being a multiracial individual in modern day America that I felt that I haven't seen as much, because I grew up in a small town in the Midwest here in the United States, and I didn't really see a lot of people like myself growing up. And so that's a side of myself that I really want to portray in this web series. But kind of going in with that, I also want to show someone who is struggling to come to terms with who they are and really starts to accept who they are, because not only is this person, you know, Latinx, so they're already kind of in the middle of two cultures, not exactly Latinx, not exactly white, they're just stuck on the border between these two cultures. They're also queer. They're also somebody who's having to, on top of all of this, also has to struggle with that fact about themselves. And especially in the Latinx culture, there's this huge idea of machismo, the idea that a man in Latinx culture is someone who holds in their emotions, doesn't cry, somebody who's the head of the household, and, you know, the wife is someone who works in the kitchen while the guy goes to work and, you know, provides for the family. You know, we really want to try and break that down with this show. And so, on top of all of that, that's another big thing that we're doing with the web series, is showing an authentic Latinx queer character who's coming to terms with who they are in terms of their culture, but also at the same time coming to terms with who they are as a queer man.
I really love just how complex that is, because, you know, listening to that, and I know from talking with you previously that there is obviously, I think, a lot of threads from your own personal history too that are in there.
Yep.
It's also it just shows how deep this is. And I think I was going to ask you too, because as a white man who has grown up gay, I don't see that world. Like, I don't understand it. And though I recognize obviously things like discrimination and racism wrong, and I understand that, you know, I think it's just so layered in, you know, identity, like, you know, the machismo part of it too. Like, when I think of that, you know, I think of, it's more subtle. I never grew up with a father or a mother who said you can't have emotions, you can't be the provider, you can't be tough. It was sort of modeled, but it was never spoken. Whereas I get the impression from listening to you, Adrian, that this was really dominant and rampant and really impacted a lot of major life choices for you, where you felt like you could or you could not behave a certain way, you couldn't come out, you know, as you are, and that feeling of not being safe. And I think that to throw that on top of working out your cultural identity too, when the media presents everyone who has a Latinx background as being, you know, a drug dealer or someone who has an illegal background, I mean, it's not exactly like you're looking up to, you know, romantic princes and princesses. It's, you know, it's like, oh, great, we're in the gutter, we're the drug dealer, we're the criminal, blah, 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 and everything that's going on. And I can imagine how, you know, frustrating it must be, you know, in hindsight, because you don't really see many role models. So I guess a question for you, Adrian, is when it comes to, you know, in your own evolution in getting to where you are today, like, can you share a bit about, you know, how you've managed to find your own identity against the backdrop of, you know, your racial upbringing and also your own queer identity too?
Yeah. I think for me, what really helped kind of mold me into who I am today was a few things. One, it was when I was, you know, in high school, getting really involved with the arts, because I felt like I had so many ideas. I had to find some sort of outlet to express all these ideas, and so getting involved with the arts was the first kind of outlet for me to truly express all these ideas of all that I was thinking about growing up, both from, you know, what I heard in the media, how I was growing up in my family, both my immediate family and my extended family, you know, dealing with all of that, but also when I went to college here in Chicago, trying to go to a place that's more diverse, more inclusive, and has a lot more experiences than a small town would provide me. And I think it was a combination of those two factors that really helped me understand who I was, to be comfortable with that, and then also to have the courage to tell a story about those experiences in that way. And that one way is, of course, through the web series I'm currently producing, because a lot of the stuff that we have in the show is from my experiences and also my twin brother's experiences, because you know, we're both queer Latinx men who really didn't understand exactly who we both were until after college, essentially, you know, and truly being comfortable with that as well.
Yeah, and I can imagine that, you know, for both of you, you and your twin brother, Adrian, that it has definitely been a challenging journey, to say the least, in terms of getting to that space. And I can imagine it's also bled a lot into your own creative work too. I mean, you've discussed, you know, how you've done work with mental health, and now you're doing this web series to really talk about, you know, growing up queer in the Latinx community and showing that authenticity. So I guess a question I have is, for this character who's growing up with this background, how do you feel you can represent that authenticity? Like, is it, because I think that it's very easy, I feel, to stereotype and to have characters that we've seen before. How do you take someone out of that cookie cutter mold and really flesh that journey out for them and show that character development?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I mean, Andrew and I, like, especially since, you know, of course, we were, you know, two of the creators of the show, we just really want to just show true human emotion. that I think everybody can connect with. The idea of feeling guilty, the idea of feeling frustrated, the idea of just not understanding so much about yourself, because it's something that we all experience, especially when we grow up. The sense of just coming of age, and so I feel with this show, we really just kind of started with those emotions and started with those ideas. And then we just knew that if we started with that, everything else will kind of follow through because of that. And I think on top of that, also just kind of putting in the episodes, conversations, and ideas that I myself wish that I experienced, when I was first coming out, and something that I wished, anybody else who's watching this could maybe hear this and then understand a lot more about, what a proper, understanding of oneself should be like, or, what are the right ideas that you should be surrounding yourself with, and all of these ideas, stuff that I, understood the more I went into this, and especially after I came out. And so I think just starting at the most basic emotions and ideas, and then working from there is how we really get out of that cookie cutter example and really just connected more with folks that way.
Yeah, I love listening to all of that, because it sounds to me like just hearing that you're really taking your audience through just seeing a character go through that stage of shame, loneliness, confusion, to being at a stage where they're comfortable, confident, growing in confidence and clarity, and really being able to connect with themselves against the backdrop of all of that's going on. Because I think it would be so easy as well for a character like that to just be another tragic character in the backdrop of everything that's going on. Whereas it sounds like this person really does strive and forge ahead for themselves in a way that empowers them without making it seem like, oh, another gay character has died. Let's just add that to IMDb's list of, tragic queer stories.
Yeah, and I think it is also important to show those moments of struggle, that I think we all face, whether it be with relationships, whether it be with family, whether it be with friends. But I think also to show that they can overcome it, that they can face it head on and just see it through, because I think that's going to be a very healthy way to show that, it's hard at first, without a doubt, but just keep pushing, because when you see it through, you'll be happy that you didn't give up.
Yeah, I really, really think that there's so much to look forward to with a series like that. And I think, one question I have for you, Adrian, is when you've got a web series like this. Now, I don't know the nature of web series, whether they're made for profit or not, but do you think that as we're creating authentic stories, do you feel that there is a risk financially, or do you feel like if it comes from, the soul, like if it's something where you feel like this is an authentic piece of my story that I just want to get out there, that trumps any need to be thinking about, a return on investment for the work that you do as an artist?
Yeah, another good question. One of the things that I've personally noticed with a lot of folks who are looking to invest in creators is that they want folks who are just passionate about the stories that they tell. For me, personally, I know folks have said this all the time that I work with, that the most personal stories you have are often the most creative ones that you have. Stories that you can connect very deeply with because it connects in some way, shape, or form to a part of who you are. And so I think a lot of investors and other creators recognize that and want to help those creatives bring those stories to the forefront, especially stories about marginalized communities, marginalized topics, and of course the LGBTQ community being one of those ideas. They really want to bring those in the spotlight a lot more. And so I think as long as you have a story that hasn't been told with a topic or community that hasn't been given its chance to be in the spotlight a lot, and you're passionate about it, I think you're going to be in a very, very good spot.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think that's something that I have found in my own personal experience too as a creator is that, you know, my budding content creation journey, I'd say that, you know, even if you're not speaking to the masses, I think speaking to people where that story is relevant and really resonates with them is far more important. And I know that Stephen Pressfield, I don't know if you've read any of his books, he wrote in The War of Art that it's, as an author, you know, going through the motions of writing all of these books for mass consumption, the ones that did so well for him was the one that really related to his own personal struggle as an artist, as an author. And I think that it's interesting that when we are connecting more with that authenticity and our, you know, and our talent is combined with that, that I think we ultimately succeed more than we would if we just wanted to create, oh, another film, be the next Steven Spielberg, so to speak, which is not to say that Steven Spielberg is by any means a bad director at all. It's just that I think sometimes the lure of, you know, the hype machine and the popularity can cause, I think, people to lose out on actually telling those really original and important stories.
Exactly.
So I think listening to everything that I've heard today with regards to queer representation in media, there's obviously a lot of work to do. There's obviously a lot of, you know, things to be done in terms of, you know, really getting that authenticity out there. You know, if we could look at the next, say, like 5+ years, where do you think we would ideally like to be? Like, if you saw the work you're contributing and what you're building towards, what are your hopes for queer representation in media?
Yeah. So, I mean, my hope is that, you know, the work that I do will fit in a way that it will encourage hopefully other creatives to go out there and tell more authentic stories, especially ones that we haven't seen. You know, especially the stories that, you know, one thing that I always tell people is, you know, what's a movie that you love or an idea that you love that no one's made yet? You know, tell that story. And so, you know, hopefully if we can be in a position where more people are more courageous to tell those stories, to bring more inclusivity into the spotlight of folks that look a lot more like what this community actually is, that's how I know we're going to be taking a step in the right direction, where we will truly embrace the words inclusivity, you know, diversity, and true queer representation. I think if we take those steps where we can truly see everybody and, you know, everyone of all different shapes, sizes, colors, you name it, if we can get to a point where we can see a lot more of that in the next 5 years, that is how I know we will be taking a step in the right direction towards better queer representation in media.
I really like the sound of that, and I think that, you know, even just visualizing that too, I could imagine that would really give people such, you know, a boost in terms of how they feel about themselves, about what the struggles that they're going through. I mean, the coach in me loves it because I love the idea of people being able to really connect with shared stories and to understand what they're going through as well. And I think especially when you come from a, you know, a different background, I mean, we see a lot of stories, you know, that are made for different communities, for different groups. And I think it's a really good thing when we actually get to see these different kinds of experiences. Because, like, I know for me, like I was mentioning, I didn't grow up with a multitude of different cultural backgrounds. And, you know, living in Australia, we are a very young country, so we don't have that rich depth behind us. So I think, you know, for me as a viewer, I think I would, you know, people like me would actually be very interested in that because it shows, you know, human challenges amidst the backdrop of all the cultural related drama that's there too. And I think generally speaking, we're all very similar. I think that we all have very similar human struggles that we go through. And so I think that in itself is what would definitely connect a lot of people together to what's going on, especially within the LGBTQIA plus space, because I know that universal feelings of shame, loneliness, lack of connectivity, I mean, that's pervasive. And I think that having stories like the ones you're showing, which I love the name, by the way. I think it's fantastic. You know,
Oh, thank you.
it, because I like the way you were describing it earlier, being like, you know, bordering on Latin and American and navigating that space. And I was like, oh, that's really clever.
Yep.
I didn't even think of it like that. I was thinking more like on the border geographically. So I like that a lot. You know, I think that there's a need, and also there would be people who would definitely resonate with what's being said too. But other than that, though, yeah, I mean, that's everything I wanted to say. I mean, I'm excited. I really think that there's lots of room for opportunity to really get these stories out there.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Like there's never been a better time than now for these stories to come to the forefront. You know, especially right now, where I think now more than ever, we're looking for stories that connect us, especially in a time where we really can't be with one another in person. So, like I said, there's never been a better time, and I think the time is now that we bring these stories to the spotlight.
Yeah, I completely agree. Well, that's everything that I wanted to talk about today with regards to queer representation in media. Adrian, for people who are following my page, where can they find you if they want to talk to you?
Yeah, so they can follow me on my Instagram at Adrian Nuño Twin. There's also an Instagram page for our web series at Bordered Web Series. Bordered spelled BORDERD Web Series. And we'll be posting a lot of updates about the web series as we go towards releasing the first full season, which will be in around May or June of this year. I just, you know, have been working on the episodes actually yesterday, and I'm really, really excited for folks to see what we're putting together. So folks can go check it out there on that page, and then also follow me at my personal page. And then for my followers who want to follow you, Ken, where can they go and follow you?
So I'm mostly on Instagram. So if they want to find me, I'm at ken.read_relationship.coach. And I am very much in the phase of just growing and welcoming people to my community, and really just taking in and listening to stories there about what people have been going through with their relationship challenges. Because one thing I have noticed, which I think is a recurring theme, doesn't matter really where we're from, I think a lot of these patterns of behavior that we face in our dating and relationship lives are universal across the globe, no matter where you're from. So
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That's definitely the last thing I've got to say with that. But otherwise, Adrian, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
We overcame technical hurdles that we got to hear, and
Yes.
I'll definitely keep in touch with you too.
Yes, definitely. And thanks everyone who tuned in. Hope you all continue to stay well, stay safe. And yeah, until next time, thanks everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.